Welcome back to the Realm, another episode of the Realm podcast where we talk about all things cyber, future technologies, and all of those things going forward. Today, we are joined by James Oliviero. Just go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, James Oliviero from Ideabox.
And what do you do at Ideabox? What sort of technologies you're using? What kind of is your role, and what do you do in the tech world?
Yeah, interesting, Rob. I mean, look, I've been doing this for 25 plus years, and I owned a sizable managed service practice. And then a few years ago, I spent some time in a think tank at Harvard University on cybersecurity risk, and kind of the light bulb went off. I was really in search of, with all the great technology and technologists, we call traditional CIO, if you will. I worked for a large investment bank in my career, and during my managed service practice days, we were managing, brand companies like the makers of the Snuggie, Topsy Turvy, Wine Enthusiast, Wine Spectator.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, why are great firms and all these great technology being reached? And during this program, I had this kind of a light bulb epiphany moment. It was, it's how you're organized. Was one of the big things. You can't be the operator and the security person. You can't be the same. That was one of the big things.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that came out of that program, how the market's approaching it, do your cybersecurity assessment and throwing, a lot of different technologies at it without really assessing, what's our real risk? What data do we have? What systems are we using that could potentially create liability for us? And I went on this journey of looking for, how do I quantify the risk for client A versus B? And my current partners today at Actifile were able to essentially throw agents out there, detect what kind of data a client may or may not have, that's PII, PCI, or compliance related, throw it up to a pane of glass and show what the real dollar risk is, monitor its use, and with one click of a button, protect that data without any end user's involvement. So it's really, an interesting, approach, the way we're going at it. And we're trying to educate the market that, it's not, don't leave this just in the hands of your CIO or director of IT. You really think they need to look at this pragmatically and throw, some numbers around what you think your risk may be. But we believe it's a combination of the data and some of the systems that the companies use. And we're able to kind of get to the heart of the matter, which is a concept of R.O.M, return on mitigation, not ROI,
Mm-hmm.
which is return on investment.
Right. Well, I think that's an interesting way to look at that, because a lot of people, I know one of the biggest reasons people don't adopt cybersecurity is cost, and plus it's also, and maybe you'll agree with me on this, I think IT departments tend to be very underfunded when it comes to general businesses. The IT department is always, they can just coast by with just one or two people, no matter the size of the company. And, a lot of people look for the return on investment. So if you have a business, if I'm going to buy a service, how is this going to help me make more money? IT services
Right.
aren't really about helping you make money. They're a preventative measure. So I like that phrasing you
Right.
say, return on mitigation, because then if you have an antivirus program and you can get a report at the end of the month that says, hey, here's 17 viruses we blocked on your network, that's far more valuable to the user than just, here's your invoice that you spent, $2,000 on antivirus this month.
Correct. But the thing that we do, we take it to the next level, which is, I'll go back to, a couple of years ago when I studied in this program on, at Target Equifax, all the major breaches, and we peeled those back, and the hundreds of millions of brand equity went out the door. Every one of those breaches, everyone at the senior level, is always in the rearview mirror, and they go, wait a minute, we had that kind of data, and it was stolen, and it was valuable on the dark web. It was valuable for the threat actors to use that. Today, it doesn't have to be that way, is what we're telling you at Ideabox. We're saying that I can put out technology really quickly, come back with an assessment real quickly, and show you, Robert, as an example, here's the data that potentially is on your network that we've identified that, will show you has date of birth record information or healthcare record information. If a threat actor or a malicious employer were to get into your environment and throw that stuff over the wall out to the internet, this is what the liability, potential liability, and cost would be to your enterprise. Now there's an opportunity for companies to assess, reassess, back to my concept of return on mitigation, and say, look, we all live with risk. How much do I want to mitigate it by? And we really believe it's, has a lot to do with the data companies ingest, create, and use. We think that's where the greatest risk is for companies.
Oh, absolutely.
And we want to educate this market. We want to educate most of the people at the C-suite that you can do something about it. And to your point, leaving this in the hands of the IT group, with maybe underfunded or otherwise, we think is a bad mistake. Because operationally, when I look at every major breach that ever occurred in the rearview mirror, they were so occupied dealing with the day-to-day, no one was really keeping their eyes on the security elements.
Right.
They got the alerts, they just ignored them, right? So Ideabox is really fractional CISO service with a combination of these tools. We walk a client through the journey of how you really should think about cyber. And again, they think that it's tech, and it's really not. It's more business-related conversations we take our clients through than tech. So we ask questions like, did you ever think if a breach would occur in your organization, the kind of data that you may house or create or receive, did you ever think about maybe what the liability would be to your organization? If you couldn't gain access to it, or somebody came knocking and said, we think that you leaked this information and you violated your privacy agreements, and now you find yourself in court. And then forensically, you find yourself down the path. Oh God, I guess we didn't protect that stuff. We help them start thinking about it in that framework, that way.
Yeah, that definitely goes down a path of something we've discussed on this podcast similar before, which is about educating people. You can install antiviruses as much as you want. You can install firewalls as much as you want. But at the end of the day, if you're getting specifically targeted by somebody, they're going to get in and they're going to get stuff. And
True.
Going to your phrasing, return on mitigation. And that's, if you are being targeted, like Sony gets hacked, seems like every 4 years they get hacked.
Yes.
And it's genuinely surprising me that they got hacked earlier this year, and they haven't really put anything in place to mitigate that damage when it happens. And that's definitely where, again, not to keep stealing your phrase there, but that return on mitigation is, help people recognize.
I think of the assimilation of the days of when cell phones came into the market. Can you hear me now? And the drop calls, right? On Wall Street, on a trading position, most of the critical pieces back in the day was they had to have their phones working correctly to deal with trades, right?
Right.
It becomes conditional. I think most people think, well, it was a breach, no big deal. Okay, we move on. Just like if you drop call, move on. You just make another phone call. It's not the end of the world. So we become conditioned. Most CEOs, and some, whether you're in healthcare or you're a regulated business, they can in some real hot water if they don't deal with this appropriately, right? But I think we've come conditioned as a society that we put up with it. I really think, I'm on a quest and a mission with the technologies we're using and my partners at Actifile, that join the Actifile revolution. If we can protect the data that in real time at a bit level, at a file level, not a container level, in advance based on policy, without the end users having to do anything, then we make it a better world because we prevent threat actors from stealing confidential data. And I think it's coming. I think these kinds of technologies are happening, and we're going to make that happen today.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely something. Well, with all the different technologies that we've been talking about on this podcast the past couple of weeks, to Web3, blockchain, all sorts of things like that, is, when people get comfortable with the technologies, because right now a lot of them are new, and it doesn't help that a lot of the blockchain is kind of living in the shadow of all the crypto bro kind of people, so it kind of has this negative stigma to the general population. But there's an actual technology behind it, and as people start to use it and it grows over the next couple of years, people will start to use all these technologies far more often. So, you've mentioned Actifile, is they do, file encryption for all these different things that you identify on their network. And more people will start using that in the near future, because more and more people, like, the number of threats out there is just going to continue to rise. And that's just true.
It is. It's like, like your point, which is, I think some are waking up the fact that whether data will leak or someone accidentally sends it or threat actors will get in. I think more and more people are understanding eventually they will get in. We really want to approach it with that concept. They're going to eventually get in, but let's get the homework out of the way. And I like to use the example of, the flight industry, right? Where, when you look at aviation, it's just a marvel that these big planes can get off the ground. Their number one concern is safety, right? And they use a framework around that, which is how people go through a process of training, and the plane's taxi, they do their cockpit, they do their cockpit thing, checks, et cetera. They push away from the gate, they fly. And during flight, if it's turbulence, right? They're trained, they follow that framework to land that plane safely. So I like to think about the plane and your business in a way that when your business is in flight, and turbulence being, in this case, a breach, could your business land safely? Do you have the framework? Have you practiced the plans? Do you know, can you get to a safe altitude that you don't have to put an out of business sign up? I will tell you and assert 70% or more companies will fail at that because they haven't done the work and the homework that Ideabox preaches that we need to do to get them prepared for that inevitable day to deal with it, right? It's always a fire drill, right? I mean, we walk clients through not only the assessment piece, the data piece, to put them on a framework for betterment, introduce them to our breach attorneys, to think about why would you say you introduce them to a breach attorney? Well, they want to make sure that they have certain documentation in place if they're dealing with sensitive data. Put them on speed dial, because when that day comes, you're not scrambling for who do I call to represent us. Whether it's cyber insurance in the middle, you want somebody to protect the company, because insurance carriers are just going to keep pushing back and not pay off in claims, right? And now you need to get your business back up to running. So companies are starting to think about this. Ideabox is in that lane, and that's how we operate. Get them focused on that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you mentioned there, 70% of companies don't have, like the resources of, disaster strikes or something happens.
Nope.
And that just kind of reminds me of my work on an MSP, is that every customer we onboarded, we created a disaster recovery document for them. And it included what platform they're using for their backups, where their backups are going, if they're on-site, if they're off-site. And then most importantly, at least in my mind, was like the failover order for, hey, something happened, we're going to fail you over. These are the order the machine's going to turn on in. We would create that for every customer, and then we would tell them, you should test it once a year. And they never would.
Right.
They would be, and we would make updates to the document as like they grew and they added servers to the document, but the end user never would bother to test things. And fortunately, knock on wood, for most of them that was never a problem. But that's always that disaster, that moment is so far out of people's minds that they can't even fathom thinking about that disaster day.
Yeah, we would preach, you talk about the DR piece, it's a component of any tabletop exercise we would ever do. We'd love to walk our clients through a scenario, which is referred to as a tabletop exercise of a cyber breach, and pick one or two of their key systems. And this is, this is just a kind of off on a tangent, it's not all of your systems, right? When you think about a company, right,
Mm-hmm.
we always try to get them focused in the workshop. We initially talk to them. Think about that one system. Is there this one system that you rely on that if completely got vaporized tomorrow, would it create significant financial impact to your business to the point where would you go to business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a funny walk when you take the CFO and everybody through it, right? Not just the inconvenience, but it usually comes to their ERP and their general ledger.
Mm-hmm.
Like they can't pay bills, they can't pay payroll, they can't,
Right.
right? It's
Yeah.
kind of
The
funny, right?
finance. Yeah.
But it's always the finance, right? Different industries might be, the proprietary, and they've got a system,
Mm-hmm.
an application, and that would be their revenue stream. But most companies that I come across, the biggest is, well, we walk them through the tabletop exercise, right? And it's like, well, what do you feel would be the longest time you can go without it, right? And then you back into the RPO and RTO, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is the disaster recovery pieces. And it's quite amusing, when you got everybody in the room that's involved with those systems, and then they go, oh my God, and you find out all the single points of failure,
Mm-hmm.
and you modify the disaster recovery plan, but get them thinking about that it's a potential that a day like this you're locked out. And how do you clear checks? How do you make payroll? And it's like it's the aha moment,
Right.
and but that's something we absolutely do as part of our practice with all of our clients. We work through a lot of the journey around cyber. That's what we do. And tabletop's a big piece of it.
Yeah, definitely.
We work with most of the MSPs. Most of the MSPs that have the disaster recovery pieces, with it, and we find out, just we want to identify the potential gaps, right? And so even with the backup schedules, we're a day and a half to 2 days from a restore, but there have been situations where if data, as you may or may not be aware, data that you backed up is already corrupted in a time thing went off. Now they're looking at ransomware data that's in the backups, and now they're talking about 30 days, right? And they go, well,
Right.
we don't have 30 days, we only have a week. But it's good and healthy to walk companies through that. It's a requirement.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and that kind of is a decent little segue here into the next thing that I wanted to talk about. But I wanted to take a minute to talk about, what you just said there. Ransomware. People are talking about recovery from ransomware, and the issue that we've seen, and we've actually seen this in our own customers, is when a disaster does strike and when they do need to fail over, then they realize, oh no, this machine had ransomware on it. We need to back it up. But that ransomware actually hit like 3 weeks ago, and all the backups since 3 weeks ago have these ransomware files on it. So to me, it kind of triggers the question of how did this quote unquote important machine get ransomware 3 weeks ago and nobody noticed? But that's irrelevant. But most backup platforms, Veeam, Cove, Barracuda, Sentinel, not Sentinel-1, all the major players out there, Rubrik, most of the time, unless there's an active agent that has some EDR capabilities built into it, which I think Rubrik is on the edge of, but don't quote me on that. But most of those systems don't care if your system is corrupted or not. The system will just be like, hey, can we back this up? Especially something like Veeam or something that taps into your ESXi environment that just takes a snapshot and backs it up. They don't care what's happening inside the environment. So your machine could be ransomwared for over a month. And yeah, sure, you're still taking backups, but you're also backing up those ransomware files. Now, the backup files themselves will be available, but it's up to the IT team of the company to figure out when did that ransomware hit to determine how far back you got to go. And like I said, I'm pretty sure Rubrik is on the edge of detecting those sort of things ahead of time, and I'm sure it's not going to be long before more. But that's definitely a component that people don't realize. They think to themselves they've got backups. All right, I got peace of mind, but it's like that's just one component of disaster recovery, and there's so much more. So,
Yeah.
all that said, segue into this. You mentioned all these tabletops you do with your customers. So, what is kind of like one of the biggest challenges you face when onboarding somebody, or maybe something that they always butt heads with you with on these tabletops that they just do not accept, so to speak, as a priority? Like if you tell them they need a stronger antivirus, and they're like,
Well,
we got Windows Defender, we'll fine.
I haven't really run into that, quite frankly. The kind of clients, they some of our clients that, that was really refreshing. We really never gone through that. It's nice, it's healthy. But, some of the things I think Ideabox does a little bit differently. In the first kickoff, we always get our clients focused around one particular document, which is vision goals around cyber. So it's a kind of it is somewhat cookie cutter, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a declaration to their employees, to themselves, and to their vendors about how they take cyber seriously at a very corporate level, right? Which includes 4 or 5 bullets of their commitment to privacy of data, commitment to keeping their employees safe, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's
Mm-hmm.
we get them, and we shift the conversation not specifically about the document, but this really sets the tone for culture, getting a company to focus on the culture around cyber as opposed to treating cyber as another event, as another add-on. So if you go with the basis of and the concepts of the way we approach it, we want you to think about this as a culturally thing. Like you want a really great work environment. We want you to think about this, put this into the fabric. Focus it on like a culturally focus. So some of the documents we put together, where when they sign off on that, it's hard for them to back off when we're starting down the path of R.O.M. For them to back off, well, we're not going to do that. Well, you say, well, your commitment is to protect the privacy of both your client's data and your employee data,
Mm-hmm.
and we've identified a risk here, and it's X dollars to remove it. That's the return on mitigation. We go back to the parent document, which is like 4 pages, which is just a credo, like it's a vision statement around it. So I haven't really run into that as a vendor. Okay.
Oh, well, that's good.
What I've run into is,
Mm-hmm.
a little skepticism at the C-suite. Well, that's what we have cybersecurity insurance for. And I laugh. I go, okay, you're a regulated business, and if you're sitting in front of a judge, and the judge hears all you did was buy cyber, you're in complete violation, because he's going to throw a book at you if you ever get dragged into a suit. In our portfolio, we're a training platform that we use in the market, right? We train not only their end users but their C-suite. We adopt a framework, whether it be NIST, CSF 171, 853. We put them on a path for that.
Mm-hmm.
Tabletop exercises. We have 24/7 SOC. If they don't want it on the SOC, fine. Then you're using some other SIM in an internal group. We would recommend it not be the group that's dealing with someone's printer and putting someone's laptop together. They've got to be purely focused on alerts and cyber, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
this is the problem we see, like MGM, help desk being re-engineered. James works for MGM. We know James is an admin. I'm going to call in as James and reverse engineer and get his credentials. It's classic social engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's kind of funny. But when we work with companies, we really want to focus them around those things. We don't really try to sell by ingredient. We have a full package that we like to walk them through, a price per seat. But about a year ago, we pivoted in our data risk management practice because it really tied very tightly with our R.O.M messaging, that we really constantly, this is in our entire portfolio. Every client has it. We're constantly showing reports how their data flows and works on PII, PCI, HIPAA, GDRP, data that meets the criteria that, hey, you can take an action here. Let us protect it, and for that it's X or Y, right? We price it.
Right. It definitely makes sense. Definitely has a useful and is very valuable to those industries that have those requirements. So that kind of leads me to the last question here, which is just what's something that you've learned through your years? I believe earlier you mentioned you've been in the cyber world for like 24 years. So what's something that you've picked up on that you
I've
think
been,
is important and something that you kind of wish people could learn without learning it the hard way, so to speak, if you've gone through a difficult
well,
experience and come out?
I, perfect question, because I think that's what I did, for 25 years, my career is in uptime, the uptime business.
Mm-hmm.
From a young buck coming out, rolling around a PC on a trading floor for an investment bank and growing into the CIO ship of that investment bank, and then going out and starting my own companies and running a traditional managed services company, which managed all the other stuff for companies.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I learned, right? And I had the ego like anybody else. The program I went through at Harvard hit me over the head like a ton of bricks and said, this is why companies are being breached. You cannot be the CIO and the CISO. You cannot operate and secure. You have to separate the function. That's why Ideabox, I created it. It purely focuses in the security lane. And we work with MSPs, okay, hand in hand. We police their activity. We police everybody else's activity. So my biggest aha moment, and I did a complete 180. I go, I got this wrong. Just like the financial world in accounting, you can't have an internal auditor and an external auditor being the same person or entity. Got to be a separation. So we're finding from that program, most major firms in the world, major banks, if you look at the CISO, no longer reports to the CIO, reports into the board of directors of risk.
Okay.
Go look at any major bank. That, I believe, it came out of that program. It said, look, we have to have a separation here. That's what I learned. Okay, and breaches are going to happen. It's really get companies lit up to the fact that it's not about the tech. It's about how you organize, how you focus around it, how you create the culture. Try to stay a little bit ahead of it. You're gonna have a bad day eventually. But if you've done some of the things that we practice, just like you practice for a disaster event, right? You'll come out the other end better. But you gotta make this part of your budget and plan for it. And it's all about, we all live with some risk, right? And R.O.M is very clear, return on mitigation. Every company lives with a level of risk. You pick your level, but use our rubric to do that. We believe that's the focus.
Absolutely.
We focus companies around that.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to agree. I think that's, a great takeaway is separating out the powers, because too often things remain isolated within their little silo of a department. I think that's one of the biggest reasons why Sony keeps getting hacked, is because all their departments are siloed away from each other and they don't share a standard practice between all of their different teams.
Probably.
So they keep getting hacked because
probably right.
Sony Pictures got hacked, and then Sony PlayStation division gets hacked, and then some other component of Sony gets hacked, because they're not. They don't have the same vision across the board between all their different teams. And I think that concept you said came out of Harvard, separating the powers, CIO, CISO, different people, because it would be far too easy for one person to just be like, okay, yeah, that's a problem, we'll get to it, and then not bring it up to anybody, because they're, I can handle it, we'll get to it, but maybe you don't, and then you get hacked tomorrow. Oops. So.
Well, it's proven. It's proven. We went through the program. I'm talking the NSA, Target, Equifax, Sony, and even Yahoo. these were the major breaches that we studied and peeled them back. Every one of them had the characteristic of they had all the alerts. They had all the structure. They had some frameworks. They were all ignored because, just like anything else, they were focusing on a project, rolling out an application, the day-to-day, and they got eaten alive. And,
yeah.
you know, Ideabox goes into the smallest of companies with that focus, saying, look, I'm not telling you to, if anything else, just hear us out. I know MSPs are being coached into, and they have to have some security practice, and I think it's healthy. But I think they're being set up for some part failure too, because if they don't have the skill set or some of the things we talked about on this podcast today, that discipline, they'll constantly keep throwing the next solution or the next technology at someone, and that's where the customers go, like, why do I really need this? Because it doesn't tie back to what I said earlier. Where's your goals, vision? Tie it back to R.O.M, return on mitigation. So we just approach it differently.
Absolutely. And I think that goes back to kind of a theme that keeps coming up on a lot of these episodes, inadvertently. I'm not planning this, I swear, is innovation for innovation's sake is not really, that shouldn't be a metric. Like, you shouldn't be innovating just because you can. You should be innovating because there's a problem that you can address. And I think applying that to like the cyber and the tech world is, I think a lot of people see the new shiny fancy technology and want to grab it and throw it in their environment without really asking, do we need this technology? Do we already have something that does this? Are we going to use this, or is this just going to be something else that generates alerts that we're going to ignore? And I think that's one of the biggest problems. Like you mentioned, the big thing is they had the information, they ignored it. And I think that's kind of the next step we're going. I forget which guest I was discussing it with, but we were talking about AI being able to sort through those alerts, the alerts, to find out which ones are important. But when you think about it for more than about 2 seconds, it's like, yeah, that's a great idea, but technically all the alerts are important. It's just, you need to pay attention to them. So, but anyways, I think that'll I was just going to say, I think that'll about wrap us up. If you have any final thoughts you'd like to add before we close out here.
No, I think we covered it all. I think keep the conversation going.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So but that'll do us for today's episode of the R.O.M. Thank you all for listening, and thank you, James, for being here.